Dr. Maria Hargrove sat at her desk in the research lab, staring at the data on her screen. She had been working in the field of neuroscience for years, studying the human brain and its complex processes. But recently, her thoughts had turned toward an even greater mystery: the moments after death. What happens to the brain once the body ceases to function? Does consciousness linger, or does it simply fade away? Maria had spent countless hours reading through scientific papers and researching theories, but there were no clear answers. It was a subject that had puzzled scientists for centuries. She wondered, could technology provide a glimpse into those final moments? She thought about new devices, like cameras, that could capture the unseen, but her imagination needed more, something that could go beyond what the current tools could offer. One afternoon, after a long meeting with her team, Maria sat down with a notebook, brainstorming ideas. She knew she needed to approach this question in a way that had never been done before. What if they could observe the very last moments from the inside, with a camera inside a coffin? It sounded like an absurd idea, but the more Maria thought about it, the more it seemed like the perfect way to explore a new frontier of science. As her ideas took shape, she realized that a simple, discrete camera could capture something no one had ever seen before. A GoPro camera, small and portable, could fit inside a coffin and record everything in the environment. She wasn't sure what they would find, but the thought of studying this from such an intimate angle excited her. Perhaps they could record a shift in the air, a change in light, or maybe even something more extraordinary. But first, she needed approval from her research team, and most importantly, from the ethics board. Maria decided to call a meeting with the team to present her idea. As they gathered in the conference room, she saw the curious expressions on their faces. "I know this may sound unusual, but hear me out," Maria began. "What if we could place a GoPro inside a coffin and record what happens during the final moments of life and beyond? We could study changes in the environment, perhaps even record things that could give us insight into human consciousness." Her team exchanged surprised looks. Some seemed skeptical, while others were intrigued by the potential of such an experiment. Maria could sense the hesitation in the room, but she pushed forward. "Imagine if we could capture footage of the unknown. This could lead to a breakthrough in our understanding of life, death, and consciousness." After a few minutes of discussion, one of the senior researchers, Dr. Harris, raised his hand. "But what exactly are we hoping to find? Are we even allowed to do something like this? Isn't it risky? Ethical?" He had a point. There were many questions to answer before proceeding. Maria nodded, knowing that these concerns had to be addressed. "We would need to follow all ethical guidelines. We could work with volunteers who are near the end of their lives, ensuring consent and transparency throughout the process." Her argument made sense. Slowly, the team began to nod, agreeing that while it was unconventional, this project could be the next step in understanding one of the greatest mysteries of human existence. As they wrapped up the meeting, Maria felt a sense of excitement. They had their first step towards something revolutionary. It wasn't going to be easy, and the path ahead was uncertain, but the idea had taken root. Now, it was time to put their plan into action. After Maria presented her idea to the team, it didn't take long for them to get on board. The challenge was not just in convincing her colleagues, but also in dealing with the complicated logistics of the experiment. There were so many things to consider: ethics, permission, and most importantly, choosing the right volunteer for the study. They couldn't simply place anyone in the coffin for the experiment. Maria and her team spent weeks researching and designing the project. Carefully thinking through each detail, they made sure to follow strict ethical guidelines, ensuring that the experiment would be conducted with the utmost respect and dignity for anyone involved. It was agreed that they would work with people who were nearing the end of their lives, and each person would give full consent to participate. After much deliberation, they found their first volunteer, Mr. Edward Collins. Mr. Collins was in his late 70s and had been suffering from a terminal illness. He was in the hospital, surrounded by his family, when Maria approached him with the idea. She explained everything carefully: what the camera would record, how the experiment would proceed, and what kind of data they hoped to gather. She assured him that the experiment was not invasive and that he would be treated with the utmost respect. Mr. Collins was hesitant at first, unsure of how he felt about the experiment. But Maria spoke to him with sincerity and patience. "We believe that what we're studying could give us real insight into the mysteries of life and death," she said. "If you agree, this could lead to something that helps future generations understand what happens after we leave this world." After taking time to think it over, Mr. Collins gave his consent. He agreed to allow a GoPro to be placed in his coffin after his passing. The team worked closely with his family, making sure they understood the experiment and its goals. As the day of the procedure approached, Maria and her team prepared the equipment. The GoPro was small, sleek, and discreet, designed to capture high-definition footage from a compact, hidden position. They carefully placed it inside the coffin, ensuring that it was positioned to record the environment around the body. It wasn't just about capturing images. They hoped to record any potential changes in temperature, light, or movement that might occur. On the day of Mr. Collins's passing, the team was ready. They arrived at the hospital and stood by as Mr. Collins took his final breaths, surrounded by loved ones. It was a solemn moment, but Maria felt a quiet sense of resolve. This was the first step toward answering questions that had eluded humanity for centuries. Once Mr. Collins passed, the team moved quickly but respectfully. They carefully placed the GoPro in the coffin, ensuring that the recording would begin once the coffin was sealed. They then arranged the funeral as normal, with Mr. Collins's family present to say their goodbyes. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, the GoPro continued to record, capturing the environment around it. The team stood by, watching the entire ceremony from a distance, waiting for the moment they could analyze the footage. With everything in place, Maria and her team returned to the lab, where they would spend the night preparing to review the footage. No one knew what they would find, but the anticipation was palpable. They were on the brink of something extraordinary. The following day, Maria and her team gathered in the lab, eager to begin the analysis of the footage. They had spent weeks preparing for the experiment, and now the moment had arrived. Everyone was anxious, unsure of what they would find. Could the GoPro camera really provide insight into the moments after death? Would the footage reveal something they never expected? Dr. Harris, one of the senior researchers, set up the equipment to review the footage. The team gathered around the large monitor, their eyes glued to the screen. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the computer as it processed the video files. Maria felt a sense of excitement and uncertainty wash over her. They were about to see something that had never been witnessed before, something that might change everything they knew about life, death, and consciousness. The footage began to play. At first, it was uneventful. The camera showed only the inside of the coffin, illuminated by the soft light from the room above. There was no movement, no changes in the environment. For the first few minutes, it seemed as though nothing was happening at all. The team exchanged puzzled glances, wondering if the experiment had been a failure. Then, something strange happened. The footage suddenly flickered. The screen momentarily went black before the image returned, and the camera seemed to shake, as though something had moved inside the coffin. The light in the room appeared to dim slightly, and for a brief moment, the camera captured what looked like a faint shadow crossing the inside of the coffin. The shadow wasn't cast by anything in the room. It seemed to come from nowhere. Maria's heart raced. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The rest of the team was equally stunned. Dr. Harris paused the footage and replayed the strange moment. The shadow appeared again, flickering in and out of view, moving across the coffin as if it had a life of its own. The team exchanged nervous glances. Was it a technical glitch, a trick of the light, or was something else happening, something they couldn't explain? They continued to watch the footage, now with heightened attention. A few minutes later, the camera shook again, this time more violently. And then, to the horror and amazement of everyone in the room, A faint, translucent figure appeared on the footage. It was barely visible, almost ghost-like, but it was definitely there. A figure that seemed to hover above the body, not moving in any conventional way. It was as though the figure was interacting with the camera, drawn to the light. Maria's hands trembled as she watched. The figure flickered in and out of view, its shape hard to define, but it seemed to watch the camera with an unsettling presence. There was no sound, only the eerie silence of the footage. It was impossible to say what it was, but one thing was clear: this was no glitch. The camera had recorded something that defied logic. "Is this real?" Dr. Harris asked, his voice full of disbelief. "This can't be happening." The team sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. The footage was like nothing they had ever seen before. The figure appeared again, and this time, it lingered for several seconds, hovering over the coffin. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't deny what was happening, but she also couldn't understand it. Could this be proof of some kind of energy or presence remaining after death? As the figure faded and the screen returned to normal, Maria took a deep breath. "We need to analyze this further. This could be a breakthrough, or something we don't fully understand yet." The room was filled with a quiet intensity. The team had just witnessed something extraordinary, and while they didn't know what it meant, they knew they had uncovered something that could change everything. The room fell silent as the footage ended. Everyone was staring at the screen, unsure of what they had just witnessed. The strange, translucent figure had appeared so clearly, yet no one could explain it. Was it a trick of the camera, a malfunction, or something far more mysterious? Maria sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had never imagined that the experiment would reveal anything so otherworldly. The figure in the coffin was unlike anything she had ever seen in her years of research. There was a chill in the air, an eerie feeling that lingered over the room. She could sense the unease spreading among the team. They had all come to study a phenomenon, what happens after death, but none of them expected to be confronted with something they couldn't explain. "Is it real?" Dr. Harris finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice was quiet, filled with uncertainty. "I mean, how do we even begin to explain this? Could it be some sort of malfunction?" Maria looked at him, her brow furrowed. "I don't think so," she said, her voice calm despite the rising tension. "This doesn't look like a glitch. We've reviewed the footage carefully, and everything seems to be functioning as it should. What we're seeing is real." Another scientist, Dr. Cooper, who had been sitting in the back of the room, spoke up. "Could it be a result of some kind of natural phenomenon? Some light reflection? Maybe something related to the camera sensor?" Maria shook her head. "I don't believe it's just a light reflection. This is something different. Look at how the figure appears. It doesn't behave like light or shadows. It's almost as if it's responding to the environment. We need to look at this from every angle." The team continued to analyze the footage, replaying it several times. But each time, the same ghostly figure appeared, flickering and fading as if it were both part of the camera's environment and completely separate from it. No one could explain it, and the more they watched, the more uneasy they felt. "I think we need to stop," Dr. Harris said after a long silence. "This is too much. We've crossed a line, Maria. This wasn't supposed to happen. We don't know what we're dealing with." Maria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had never expected the experiment to lead to such a discovery, and now that it had, she was torn between the scientific curiosity that pushed her to continue and the fear of what they had uncovered. The figure they had seen on the footage wasn't just a curiosity. It was something that challenged everything they thought they knew about life and death. "We can't stop now," Maria said firmly, her voice steady, but filled with a quiet determination. "We have to keep going. This could be a breakthrough, the answer to questions that have plagued humanity for centuries. We're witnessing something that no one has ever seen before. We have to understand it." Dr. Harris looked at her, a mixture of fear and concern in his eyes. But what if we're not ready for what we're uncovering? What if this is something that we don't understand and can't control? Maria paused. She understood his concerns, but she couldn't back down now. The footage was too important. It was too significant. This was more than just a scientific study. It was a chance to answer questions that had haunted humanity for millennia. The team, although still shaken, nodded in agreement. They had come this far, and turning back wasn't an option. But the fear in the room was palpable. No one knew what would happen next, and the weight of their decision hung heavy in the air. Maria looked at her team, resolved. We're in this together. Whatever we find, we will face it. But we have to keep going. The room was thick with tension as Maria and her team sat in front of the screen, watching the strange footage over and over again. The figure that had appeared in the coffin seemed impossible, and no one could explain it. Some of the scientists were still in shock, while others were trying to rationalize what they had seen. But the more they watched, the more questions seemed to emerge. Maria ran her fingers through her hair, deep in thought. "This doesn't make sense," she said quietly. "We've reviewed the footage from every angle, and there's no sign of a malfunction. No equipment failure. This is something different." Dr. Cooper, who had been skeptical from the start, spoke up. "I'm not saying I don't believe what we're seeing, but we need to consider all possibilities. Could it be something in the environment around the coffin? Maybe a reflection from a nearby object, or even something as simple as a draft causing the camera to move slightly?" Maria shook her head. "I don't think so. The camera was steady, and the shadows and figure weren't reflections or drafts. They were too intentional. It almost seemed like the figure was aware of the camera, and we've ruled out any interference from the surroundings." The team fell silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. It was clear that they were all grappling with the same dilemma. What had they just witnessed? Was it possible that something supernatural was at play? Or was there a natural explanation they hadn't considered? Dr. Harris, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "We need to do more tests. We can't just look at this once and jump to conclusions. We have to run more experiments, gather more data. Maybe we missed something." Maria agreed, but there was a growing sense of unease within her. She had been prepared to study the process of death from a scientific perspective, but this was far beyond anything she had anticipated. There were no clear answers. She had always believed that science could explain everything, but now she wasn't so sure. As the days went by, the team continued to analyze the footage, but no matter how many times they reviewed it, they kept coming back to the same conclusion. The figure in the coffin was still there, flickering in and out of sight, unexplainable. The more they examined it, the more they realized they had no framework for understanding what they had seen. It didn't fit into any scientific model they knew. Maria decided to reach out to other experts in the field, parapsychologists, physicists, and even philosophers who had studied consciousness and life after death. She felt a growing need to understand what was happening, and she hoped that talking to others might provide some clarity. In the meantime, Maria's team began to grow more divided. Some were eager to continue the investigation, while others began to question whether they should stop. There was a deep sense of fear in the air. If they continued, what would they uncover? And if they stopped, would they be leaving the mystery unsolved forever? Maria found herself torn. She had always been driven by her curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge. But now, that very curiosity was leading her into uncharted territory. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of discovering something profound, and perhaps something that was not meant to be understood. As the debate continued among her team, Maria realized that they were at a crossroads. They could walk away and pretend the footage was just a mistake, or they could face the unknown and risk everything for the truth. She took a deep breath, making her decision. "We have to keep going," she said firmly. "We've come too far to stop now. Whatever this is, we need to understand it." The days after the first review of the footage were tense. The team was divided, And while some were eager to continue the investigation, others were growing uncomfortable with the unknown. Maria could sense the fear in the air, but she couldn't stop thinking about the figure they had seen in the coffin. It was impossible to ignore, and the curiosity within her kept pushing her forward. She knew that they had stumbled onto something extraordinary, and she couldn't let it go without uncovering more. One morning, as the team met in the lab, Maria announced that they were going to reanalyze the footage, focusing on the strange figure that had appeared in the coffin. She had spent hours thinking about the possible explanations, but none of them seemed to fit. The figure wasn't a trick of light, nor was it a camera malfunction. It felt real somehow, and that thought kept her up at night. "We need to analyze the footage frame by frame," Maria said as she looked at the team, determination in her eyes. "We need to find any clues that can help us understand what we saw. Maybe we missed something, or maybe there's something deeper happening that we don't understand yet." The team agreed to re-examine the footage, but the atmosphere was heavy with doubt. No one knew what they were looking for. Was it a mistake, a freak accident, or was it something much more profound than they could have imagined? As the footage played again on the large screen, Maria's eyes were fixed on the screen. The figure appeared again, flickering, almost like a reflection. But then it seemed to move closer to the camera, and for the first time, it appeared to interact with the environment. It hovered, almost as if it was aware of the camera watching it. The team stared at the screen, their breaths held. Suddenly, Dr. Harris, who had been quiet throughout most of the analysis, pointed to the screen. "Look at that," he said, his voice shaking. "The figure, it's not just hovering. It looks like it's reacting to the movement of the camera, like it knows it's being observed." Maria's heart raced as she watched closely. She hadn't noticed it before, but now it was clear. The figure seemed to pause, as if aware that the camera was focused on it. The movement wasn't random. It was as though it was responding to the presence of the camera, even though no one could explain how. "We've never seen anything like this before," Dr. Cooper said, his voice filled with awe. "This isn't just an anomaly. It's something we can't explain." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The footage they were watching wasn't just strange. It was beyond anything they had ever studied. It was as if they were witnessing something otherworldly. The figure, though faint, was moving, reacting, and interacting with its environment in a way that defied explanation. "We need to understand what this is," Maria said quietly, her voice filled with both wonder and concern. "This footage might be a breakthrough, but we need to gather more data to figure out what we're really seeing." The team agreed, but there was no denying the fear in their eyes. What were they dealing with, and why had it shown itself to them? Over the next few days, Maria reached out to experts in various fields: physicists, parapsychologists, and philosophers who had studied the nature of consciousness and the afterlife. She knew that the team needed help in making sense of what they were seeing. Meanwhile, the footage became more unsettling. The figure continued to appear, moving in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The team was no longer sure what they were witnessing, but they all agreed on one thing: they had stumbled upon something profound, something that could change the way humanity understood life and death. As Maria stared at the screen, she realized that the footage had opened a door to a mystery they couldn't ignore. Whatever this was, they had to uncover the truth. But the more they searched for answers, the more they realized that the questions were only getting deeper. As the days passed, the team's investigation into the footage became more intense. Maria and her colleagues were no longer just analyzing a strange figure on a screen. They were now faced with something that seemed to be challenging everything they thought they knew about death and consciousness. The footage, which had once seemed like an anomaly, now appeared to be a doorway to a mystery they couldn't ignore. And with each frame, it felt like they were getting closer to uncovering something that could change science forever. After reviewing the footage again, Maria noticed something subtle yet important. The figure in the coffin, which had initially appeared only faintly, now seemed to grow clearer in certain frames. It wasn't just an outline anymore. The figure looked more solid, as if it was taking form. The team watched in disbelief as the figure moved closer to the camera once again, its motions now more deliberate, like it was aware of their observation. "Look at this," Maria said, pausing the footage. "This isn't random. The figure seems to be moving closer, almost as if it wants to interact with the camera. But how is that even possible?" Dr. Harris leaned in, his face etched with concern. "This doesn't fit into any scientific model we know. A figure like this, it's not something we can explain with the current understanding of physics or biology. It's not supposed to happen." Despite their doubts and confusion, the team couldn't deny what they were seeing. The figure, though still faint and almost ethereal, seemed to be aware of the camera. It responded to the light, moving into the area that the camera's lens focused on, and then retreating as if it knew it had been noticed. Maria took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She knew they had to do something with this footage. This was no longer just an experiment. This was a breakthrough. But what did it mean? What was this figure? And more importantly, what did it mean for the understanding of life and death? "We need to consult other experts," Maria said. "We can't interpret this on our own. This is beyond our understanding at the moment." Over the next few days, Maria reached out to a variety of experts in the fields of parapsychology, neuroscience, and even philosophy. She was hoping to get some perspective on the footage, as it was quickly becoming clear that they were dealing with something that didn't fit into the traditional scientific framework. Dr. Laura Green, a renowned parapsychologist, agreed to meet with the team. When Maria shared the footage with her, Dr. Green was speechless at first. She watched in silence, her eyes fixed on the screen. Finally, she spoke. This could be a manifestation of energy left behind. Some kind of imprint from the body's final moments. We've seen reports of similar phenomena, but never something this clear." Maria listened intently, absorbing every word. "So, you're saying this could be an imprint of the person's consciousness or energy after death?" Dr. Green nodded. "It's possible. In our research, we've come across evidence suggesting that some part of us might remain after death, whether it's energy, consciousness, or something else entirely. But this footage is unlike anything I've ever seen." The team continued to study the footage and consult with experts, each new piece of information adding to the growing sense of wonder and fear. The figure was undeniably present, and as the days went on, the team began to question everything they knew about life, death, and what might lie beyond. As the investigation deepened, Maria realized that they had uncovered something far more significant than they had ever imagined. This wasn't just about testing theories anymore. It was about exploring the very nature of existence itself. The answers, if they could be found, would not just change science. They would change humanity's understanding of life and death. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of uncertainty and excitement for Maria and her team. With each new piece of information and every expert consulted, the mystery surrounding the footage deepened. What had begun as a simple experiment had turned into something far more complex. The figure in the coffin, flickering and moving as if aware of the camera, was still there every time they looked at the footage. Each new review of the footage only seemed to raise more questions, but there were no clear answers. Maria knew that they couldn't keep this to themselves for much longer. The team had reviewed the footage so many times that they could hardly see it for what it was anymore. They were trapped in a cycle of confusion and wonder, unsure whether what they had discovered was a breakthrough or an illusion. One thing was certain: they couldn't ignore it. The pressure to make a decision weighed heavily on Maria. Should they release the footage to the public? Should they continue the investigation? Or was it best to walk away and pretend that they had never seen the figure at all? The possibilities seemed endless, but Maria knew that whatever they decided would change everything. One morning, Maria called a meeting with the team. The decision had to be made, and it had to be made now. As the team gathered around the table, the tension in the room was palpable. No one knew how to move forward, but everyone knew that they had crossed a line. "We've all seen the footage," Maria began, her voice calm but serious. "We know what we're dealing with, and we all know how significant this is. But we also need to ask ourselves, are we ready to share this with the world? Are we ready for what might happen once people see what we've uncovered?" Dr. Harris was the first to speak. "I've been thinking about it a lot," he said, his voice filled with doubt. "What if we're wrong? What if this is just a trick of the light? A malfunction we didn't catch? I'm not sure we should release this. It could ruin our careers, and worse, it could create panic." Maria nodded, understanding his concerns. "I've thought about that too. But we can't ignore what we've seen. The figure in the coffin is not something we can explain. It doesn't fit any of the scientific models we know. We've consulted experts, and they agree. This is something that's never been seen before." Dr. Cooper spoke up next. "But what if it's something we're not supposed to understand yet? What if we're looking at something beyond our reach, something that shouldn't be explored?" Maria paused, taking in his words. She knew that fear and doubt were natural reactions to the unknown, but she also knew that science was about discovery, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it might be. "We can't ignore it, Cooper," Maria said quietly. "We have a responsibility to follow the truth, no matter where it leads. This footage, this discovery, it's bigger than us. It's bigger than our careers. If we hold back, we may never get another chance to understand what's really happening." The team fell silent as they considered her words. Slowly, one by one, they nodded in agreement. The fear was still there, but so was the sense of responsibility that came with their discovery. They couldn't turn away from it now. Whatever the truth was, they had to face it. "We'll release the footage," Maria said, her voice firm. "But we'll do it carefully. We'll share it with the world, but we'll also make sure that we're prepared for the questions and the consequences. This is just the beginning of something much bigger." The team agreed, and they began to make preparations. It wasn't going to be easy, and they didn't know what would happen next. But they knew that they had uncovered something extraordinary, and they couldn't keep it hidden. As the team prepared to release the footage, Maria felt a sense of both fear and excitement. This was a moment that could change everything, but it was also a moment that could shape the future of science and the understanding of life itself. The unknown was no longer something to be afraid of. It was something to be explored.